Welcome back to the Theology of the Buddy podcast, a podcast for Catholics who love tradition and want more of it. I'm Chris, and I'm joined by my fellow wonderful co-hosts, Mike and Brooke. Say hey, Mike and Brooke.
Hey, Mike and Brooke.
I was going to say that.
How are you guys doing?
I beat the dad to the dad joke.
Ooh.
We're doing good.
Yeah?
We're doing well.
Yeah.
Got her.
How was your
Got your
Christmas,
back.
guys?
It was good. It was good. We didn't have to travel far, which was really nice. We got to spend time with, the kids and each other and our families, and we got some important stuff done around the house, which made me feel really happy. And just taking time to stay home, be present, have presents,
Nice.
eat, mass. That's all I ever wanted.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. How about you?
It was a crazy Christmas. I'm not going to lie. It was a dead rush. So Julie had the wonderful, beautiful baby boy whose name is John William Alphonsus. So if you haven't been following us on Facebook, we did a Facebook Live where we actually got a chance to introduce the world to him, which was kind of neat. So John was born. Then we had him baptized, which was sweet. In the old rite, made it even sweeter.
So good.
And he's got some pretty great godparents.
They're okay.
Well, you're okay. I'm pretty fantastic. Who's raised
Hi,
him?
pretty fantastic. I'm dead.
There it is. Yeah.
So Mike and Brooke are the wonderful godparents. So it was an honor to have them say yes to that. And then Christmas was awesome. It was so busy that all I could do was put up a tiny tree and put some lights on it. I didn't have time to go and pull out the decorations or anything. I just set that up, and I also set up Julie's Christmas village that she has been super excited for. So she went out to Walmart and bought a few months ago a bunch of stuff for a Christmas village, which included a church, a taco truck, and a Walmart.
A Walmart?
She bought a Walmart. Yeah.
Why?
Because it's Julie and she likes Walmart.
That's what I want. My traditional Christmas village. Big box stores.
Yes. It's cute. It's super cute. I'll have to take a picture and show you guys if you haven't seen it yet.
Please.
It'll be up until Candlemas, so it's pretty sweet. Also, we have little figurines of we've got some priests and some nuns and a schola and stuff. So it's pretty sweet.
I have a horrible confession to make.
Okay.
I took down my Christmas decorations today.
Wow.
Not all of them, but.
What ones didn't I take down? Oh, the Santa on our front lawn.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember when Candlemas was, and everything was super, super messy. And it was just messy. It's I made it to the Epiphany.
Yeah. I mean, some people decide to take it down at Epiphany, and it's fine. I mean, the official Christmas tide is over. We're now in Epiphany tide.
Yeah, and that's what I said to Brooke, because she was like, when should we take our Christmas stuff down? Because we're baby trads.
Yeah.
And we have to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
So I think I was kind of back and forth, either Epiphany or Candlemas.
I don't think I've been to a Candlemas yet. Have I been to Candlemas? Is it it doesn't fall on a Sunday?
No, not generally.
No, okay. Yeah, I don't think I've been to a Candlemas yet.
February 2nd.
You often don't get out to the feast days that aren't Sundays.
Yeah.
Because you're lazy.
I'm not lazy.
Feminine.
Yeah,
wow.
a little bit.
You pronounced feminine wrong. But she wasn't that either. Have you seen what she wears? Literally went out in a tracksuit yesterday, and I was asking Mike, hey, does this tracksuit go with these boots? And Mike's like, well, I'm not going to stop you, but I wouldn't even leave the house in that tracksuit.
Savage.
I look like a giant sock.
That's like, not only do they not go with the boots, they don't go with outside the house.
To be fair, it was modest. I was 100% covered up, but I also looked like I was wearing, like, I don't know, I was wearing a big old tracksuit.
Like a super baggy one.
Oh, and
sweater and
sweatpants. Purple socks and my big Skechers.
So let me get this straight. Did you grow up in East London?
Yes. Yes, I did.
Your clothing choice.
Take a girl out of East London. You can't take East London out of a girl.
It's true.
Yeah.
I went up to Costco looking like that. How mom am I? I go out in my tracksuit just to Costco. I'm like, I had such a busy day.
Just driving by Costco gives me like a partial panic attack because it's so busy all the time. All the time.
You got to know when to go. No, there is a window, and I know when this window is.
Have we talked about this on the podcast before?
No,
I'm getting deja vu.
It's really important. The window is between 1:30 and 3 o'clock, because everybody that came in to get some stuff at lunch is gone, and everybody has already finished up because they got to go back home for the kids. So all of the parents ain't there. All the families ain't there. So you hit up Costco between 1:30 and 3:30, you're good.
Now, to be fair, is the parking lot like still 3/4 full though?
No, it's 100% full.
No. If you go on a Monday or Tuesday between 1:30 and 3:30, it's not as busy.
Okay.
Yeah, I swear you will always get a parking spot at the very back.
At the very back.
Yeah. This is best case scenario for the South London Costco. You only have to wait for like 3 people in line at the checkout.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Only 3 people. Crazy.
Yep.
Crazy. Wow.
It was here that they descended into a...
none of this is part of our podcast.
No.
But anyway.
But speaking of Costco, on our way by Costco just recently, Julie and I had to visit with our OB, who gave Julie like the A-OK, pretty much just 2 more weeks because she had a C-section. So she's still healing. But we're driving by Costco, and after the minor panic attack of looking at Costco, we made a right into the Arby's and took our son to Arby's for this first time. He was really hungry, so that's a Simpsons reference.
He was so hungry to eat Arby's.
That's like a sacrament of initiation.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. When Julie's water broke, right? Because she had like a pre-break. We were driving to the hospital, and she's like, "I'm hungry." And I'm like, do you want to see if Arby's is open? And she's like, yes. So we went to Arby's at the beginning of the process, to see, the OBs and the doctors at the hospital. And then after the end. So pretty great. Anyway, so friends, wanted to quickly mention and give a shout out to our good friend Dan, who wrote into us about the music podcast that Mike and I did. And then we're going to begin a new series. So Dan wrote into us and wanted to let us know that he said, I really enjoy the show where Mike and Chris discuss music. It made me reflect on my own music choices and how my favorites engage my intellect and lead me to silence. A real experience of beauty. For you guys, I have a couple recommendations. So he told us, When the Man Comes Around by Johnny Cash. He says, this is the best song about the apocalypse you'll hear. I have a funny story about that in just a second. He said, High Watermark by Iced Earth. This is the third part in a 30-minute metal song about the Battle of Gettysburg. That's all he had to say. Good enough. Thank you. Mike and I appreciate
That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of songs that go over 20 minutes.
Yeah, me too. All of Our Sins by VNV Nation. He said it has very powerful lyrics that cause him to be silent and really think about what's being said. And then The Last Stand by Sabaton, another historical heavy entry. This is about the sack of Rome and the last stand of the Swiss Guard. I've heard that song before. Our friend Greg, who listens to the podcast, had recommended that song to us, I think. Super, super cool. So, Dan, thanks for writing in. But yeah, I wanted to talk about When the Man Comes Around by Johnny Cash. So this song is actually on one of the pin lists that I make. It's from Carrots for Advent from Haley. Can't remember her last name. She's big in the Catholic world. Anyway, so she has
Carrots for Michaelmas.
Carrots for Michaelmas.
Yeah, but her Spotify Advent album is called Carrots for Advent.
Sorry.
And so she had the song on it. And so we were listening to it as I was actually setting up the Christmas village. And John was a little fussy, and like leading up to this song playing. And as soon as this song started playing, he just like chilled right out. Just right out. And he just loved this song. So I'm a little worried that he's going to be a huge Johnny Cash fan. Just kidding. It'll be cool if he is. I will respect his life choices. I will. But yeah, no, it is a really good song. And yeah, it's definitely an Advent song. Have you guys heard the song before?
I know I've heard it.
I can't say if I have or not.
Recently,
can't remember.
Yeah,
I can kind of hear a bit of the chorus in my head, but
yeah, it's good. It's good. So anyway, So again, Dan, thanks so much for the recommendations and for listening to the podcast and sharing with us your thoughts. So we really appreciate it. So guys, if you enjoy our podcasts, if you have thoughts about them, if you disagree with them wholeheartedly, or if you love them, or you're on the fence, or you have questions or whatever, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email us at theologyofthebuddy@gmail.com. You can find us by just looking up Theology of the Buddy. You can just Google it and find our Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. So anyways, yeah. So friends, tell us what this next series is going to be all about.
All right. So the series is basically going to be rite comparisons. So we're going to be looking at the Tridentine Rite,
Speaking of right, you're already wrong.
Am I?
It's liturgy comparisons.
Oh, liturgy
Novus Ordo and Tridentine are the same rite.
Right. Okay. Liturgy comparisons.
And so is the Ordinariate, also Roman rite.
Okay. So, liturgy comparisons. We're going to be talking about the Novus Ordo, the Tridentine, right? I always say it wrong.
The Liturgy of Gregory the Great.
Yep. We're also going to be looking at the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostem. And so.
Did you say Ordinariate Use in there?
Oh, and Ordinariate Use. I thought you said it earlier. Anyway, yeah, the Ordinariate Use.
I was going to say as well, we're also going to make note of some things from Lutheran, the Lutheran liturgy. So,
yes.
It's going to be a big podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, we really just want to compare side by side and just see how they're different, what things they have in common, but also discuss how things have changed and why they've changed, why they probably shouldn't have changed. And there's so much to discuss here.
We're going to go through the liturgies in their structure, step by step. And because even the very different rites have some pieces in common where you can break them up and compare this part to this part, right? Every one of those liturgies has readings and then a second half that purports to contain the Eucharist. It does in the ones that aren't Lutheran. And
and also hoping that as we go through these episodes too, we can actually create a chart that you can look at everything all together, because that's been something I've been hoping that I could find, just for myself, as I've been learning more about the liturgy, and I can't really find them. At least one that has a bunch of the liturgies kind of all side by side, because comparing them is really, really interesting and also important.
Yeah, the hope is to bring some objectivity to the discussion, right?
Yeah.
You can stand here all day and say the traditional Latin Mass is the best and y'all should ditch the Novus Ordo, and that's that. But then the discussion becomes, I like this, but no, I like this. But if you want to actually get somewhere in thinking about it, I think breaking down the exact differences and then being able to reason about what those differences mean, how they got there, that gives you something to go on rather than just button heads.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. Like, I've really been looking at the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, as I've just been really, really interested in it. And I kind of wanted to, dive into a topic that I'm not super, super familiar with. And their liturgy is so cool. Like, it's really, really beautiful, and makes me kind of wish I could go to one a little bit more as well. 50-50. I'd go to both. I think they're both great. So that's just me.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting too, because like for us, again, we're not coming from a position of we've grown up with the traditional Latin Mass and that's that. We've gone kind of on a collective journey together, which has been kind of neat. And, because we've been there, generally speaking, through all of it, going from being firmly grounded and apologetic in our approach to the Novus Ordo, to coming to better understand tradition and love it, and to love the traditional Mass. And I've particular memories of us. I remember Mike and I going to Latin Mass like 10 years ago, even more than 10 years ago, I think. And but also like us going together to Divine Liturgy.
Yep.
Like we've done a lot of it together. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to an Ordinariate Mass?
Yes. Yeah. I got to go to an Ordinariate Mass in Indianapolis. I went with Julie once. That was really cool. That was very, very cool. Granted, I had already been firmly grounded in the Latin Mass at the time, so it wasn't as much of it wasn't like going from the Novus Ordo to it. But yeah, I found it incredibly neat. I also saw a lot of similarities between it and the Mass of St. John Chrysostom. Just some of the ways that the prayers are worded and whatnot are very, very almost Byzantine in its structure. Kind of cool.
Yeah.
But one of the
there's a lot of stuff pulled out of the TLM too.
Yeah,
it's a cool liturgy. It really is. That was the one. Like, we used to go to the Ordinariate if we couldn't go to the Latin Mass back in Kitchener. Back
when they used to have, they had an Ordinariate community for a while at St. Mary's in Kitchener.
Yep,
it was so cool.
Yeah,
it was great.
Yeah, I remember you experiencing it, because I think you started going to Ordinariate first, right? Before you were more into the Latin Mass.
We had not gone to very many Latin Masses at that time. We weren't going every week to Latin Mass. I think we were kind of like
We had
transitioning away from Novus Ordo, I think, and like, but it was harder to get to the Latin Mass in Kitchener.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a compromise because it has so many of the like more traditional prayers and a lot more reverence and
there is familiarity in the like for the ordinariate for those that are coming from the Novus Ordo. You know, it is in the vernacular, you know, it has bits of Latin and, you know, kind of mixed in there.
Yeah. And there are some prayers there that I haven't seen anywhere else. Maybe in Byzantine they have one similar to that. I'm in love with their prayer they say before communion.
It's so beautiful.
Prayer of humble access, I think they call it. It's so good.
It's so cool. So cool.
We'll be talking about those things in more depth.
For sure. One of the things too, maybe to point out is that as we're going through it, like, I think as a template, we're kind of using the Tridentine Mass in terms of its structure as kind of the springboard from which we look at the other rites, or the other liturgies, if you want to go that way. Yeah, because it's just easy that way because that's kind of familiar instead of going, say, from the Mass of St. John Chrysostem, which we're not so familiar with, and using that as the springboard.
And it makes sense with the other liturgies too, because Novus Ordo and Ordinariate and Lutheran liturgies all grew out of the traditional Latin Mass.
Yep.
As stuff happened in history.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to just kind of start with, maybe we'll start at the beginning of Mass, and that actually starts not even in the Tridentine rite. It doesn't start like out in front of the people, technically. Mass is actually begun at the time when the priest begins vesting. So we're gonna start looking at that. But maybe before we do that, let's talk about the Tridentine, the Mass of Paul VI, or the Novus Ordo, and the Mass of St. John Chrysostom in their origins. So with the Tridentine Mass, the Usus Antiquior, the main parts of all the Mass can be traced back to apostolic times. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, guys? I don't know.
I was going to research stuff like that, but somebody wanted to record a podcast today.
Oh.
Yeah. So should we talk about, like, in the origin, Gregory the Great?
Yeah.
And how, like, in a sense, you can call the traditional Latin Mass the Mass of Gregory the Great,
right, in
a similar way to how the Easterns have the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom.
Right.
And we also have the Mass of Paul VI.
Right.
But I think it's true of both St. John Chrysostom's liturgy and Gregory the Great's that they have deep apostolic roots. Right. They didn't write these masses from scratch like Bunini did.
Right.
They,
yeah. The thing is,
grew organically, and they just codified
it. Exactly. Yeah. But we can trace the main parts of the Mass of St. Gregory the Great back to the time of the apostles, as well as St. John Chrysostom. You can see that there, but you can see that the Novus Ordo, while it still has its roots in the Tridentine rite, a lot of it has been stripped.
Yeah, stripped or rewritten by committee.
Right.
And
Yeah, it's not like it's something that happened organically.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like there's something to be said about, like for example, for the Divine Liturgy, there was a lot of social stuff that influenced how, like, the form.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of traditional stuff in terms of how Byzantine society kind of functioned and whatnot. And you can see those things in their liturgy that they continue to do today. It has solid roots.
What do you mean? Do you have any examples?
Oh, like for example, let me just look here.
Another thing too, you mentioned St. Gregory the Great, but Pope Pius V. So didn't he promulgate?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's the guy who said, "Here's the missal, and unless it's something more than 200 years old, you can't use it anymore. You have to use the Roman Rite." And that was in like 1500s, right?
Yeah, that was 1570. Yeah, promulgated 1570 edition of the Roman Missal, made its use obligatory throughout the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church, except where there existed a different Mass liturgy of at least 200 years standing.
Yes, that's what I meant. So Gregory the Great didn't actually publish a missal and make it obligatory like Pius V did, but he did organize and write down a lot of the liturgical stuff that was happening in Rome at the time. Yeah, I should probably learn how to put this better. But,
I have my point.
Oh,
about the Divine Liturgy. I hope it makes sense to everybody. So, for example, in their liturgy, icons are super, super important. You know, they always have the iconostasis. This kind of ties into their art and architecture. But again, culturally, that was like something they were used to.
Right.
Too.
Can you maybe explain for those who may not be
if you read
familiar?
The iconostasis?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically there's in the center, there is a door, and then there are two doors on either side, or one door on either side. Sorry. There's an icon on those doors as well. And,
it's an angel that's on each of those doors. They call them the angel doors.
Yeah. Basically I was going to say, like, having icons is a huge part of their liturgy. You don't walk into, a Byzantine Rite church and there be no icons.
Right.
And they address those icons as well in their liturgy, not because they're addressing like the actual picture, but because they're addressing, the saints that they are surrounded by because of the Mass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Art and architecture, I think, are super important. How liturgy are important for like the experience of the liturgy. You have an ugly church, 9 times out of 10, the liturgy ain't going to be that great either.
No.
Not sorry. But it's to put us in a space of worship. And they make a point of making sure the space that you're in reflects, what is happening in their liturgy. Yeah. Maybe that's the ultimate point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The space, what's around you, what is happening is all tied together.
Right.
It's not separate. It's one.
Right. And the interesting thing that, at least that I've kind of noticed, that a lot of Catholics are seemingly waking up to is that need for beautiful art and architecture in the church. I mean, we had, 50, 60 years, 70 years even of bad architecture that pervaded into the church. And, and you can see how even that itself has impacted things like vocations and the faith of the people, where the faith used to be taught to the people through the church itself, through the stained glass windows, through the paintings, through whatnot. It was whitewashed in a big way. And so, of course,
literally.
Yeah. And so, of course, the weird irony of it, right, is that these pictures and this art and the architecture was meant to be instructional to the people because they were illiterate. They couldn't read the scriptures. They couldn't read this or that because, books were expensive back then and blah, blah, blah. So you had this beautiful church to teach you the faith. The weird the inversion of this is now we're completely literate, but we're liturgically illiterate. We are faithfully stupid. They removed all that stuff because, we're adults in the faith now. We don't need to be treated like children. And like the faith has dwindled in these places to a alarming degree.
There was, I think, always more to it than just being unable to read too, right? Like
no, for
the
sure.
faith is transmitted in different ways, and through beauty is always going to be an important way of learning the faith. Mm-hmm. Maybe even more so than actually reading, even if one is able to read.
And in a sense, like the art and the architecture influence how we worship.
Yeah. And
the liturgy is like, that the pinnacle of that,
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. It's
true. Can I go back to Gregory the Great for a second?
Yeah, man.
Sorry, I just looked up to clarify what I was trying to say earlier, but I forgot. Was they sometimes credit Gregory the Great because his revision was kind of the first big step to codifying an official version of the Mass.
Okay.
Although he didn't actually promulgate a missal like Pius V did 1,000 years later, he did do a complete revision of the Mass and popularized a more standardized version of it for the Roman Rite.
But again, it's probably good to note as well that this was not something that St. Gregory the Great just kind of pulled out of thin air or had written on a bar napkin. This is something that...
Absolutely not.
This was something that was happening in the universal church. This was the way that they were praying since the time of the apostles, and he was, and the organic changes that had come from that, and like he was just kind of putting it on paper as to what it was, right?
Yeah.
And formalizing what was already happening.
Yeah, and he did this like the late 500s, and we have records of so many of the prayers going back centuries earlier. And, what he did was, it was really just a gathering of what was being done, a revision and sorting out of local differences and stuff like that, trying to standardize things, but definitely not creating the liturgy out of whole cloth. Mm-hmm. Definitely like just more organizing and codifying what was being done.
Yeah. And to go off of that, if I can briefly discuss the Divine Liturgy, and this is just me looking at the Wikipedia, but it seems to be across the board. It was compiled by St. John Chrysostem. Like he helped gather all of everything together under John's guidance as Archbishop. And it was the Divine Liturgy of the Church of Holy Wisdom, the Hagia Sophia. And it became the usual divine liturgy in the churches within the Byzantine Empire. And this liturgy was written to basically combat heresy and define Trinitarian theology for the Christian church in Byzantium, sorry. Yeah.
When was that?
That was in the 5th century. Yeah. So 398 to 404.
So around the same time that St. Gregory was beginning to do that too, right? I mean,
a little earlier.
Yeah.
Gregory was the end of the 500s.
Oh, is it? Okay. But still, like, that's
almost 200 years.
But that's still like super early on, right? In terms of church history.
Oh, yeah.
We refer to them as the church fathers for that reason.
Yeah.
Because they were, part of that group that really founded so much of what we have today. But maybe we can hop over and talk about Paul VI and his liturgy. So at the Second Vatican Council, they got a Vatican committee together under the leadership of Cardinal Annibale Bugnini. Right? It was Cardinal, right? Cardinal Bugnini. Yep.
Are you sure we can't call him arch heretic Annibale Bugnini?
Makes me so mad. Gosh.
Yeah. Freemason Annibale Bugnini, according to the von Hildebrands. They still, Mrs. von Hildebrand, I can't think of her name. Alice, thank you. Yeah. Alice. She still holds that Annibale Bugnini was straight up a Freemason. But yeah, anyway, so under the leadership of Annibale Bugnini, Cardinal, this new rite was written. And yeah, so we're going to kind of talk about his intentions later.
Yeah. Were you going to talk about the observers?
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get into his in full intentions, which have been documented later. But just a side note to say that the commission that was created to produce the new Novus Ordo Missal had the assistance, quote unquote, of 6 Protestant observers. So this is the first time in history that a non-Catholic was even involved, let alone 6 of them in helping with the liturgy. And there's a reason why there was Protestant involvement, but we will be talking about that in a later episode. So yeah, when it comes to the Mass itself, there is also the divisions kind of the Mass. So there's the Mass of the catechumens and the Mass of the faithful that you have in the Tridentine Rite. What about in the other side of things, guys?
Okay, so in terms of the Divine Liturgy, so there's the Liturgy of Preparation, which is private. It's done by the priest and the deacon.
This is done in the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, right?
Yes. When I say Divine Liturgy, just assume I mean of St. John Chrysostom.
Okay.
Just to clarify.
Even though there are other ones we're talking about.
Yeah.
Specifically this one.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's done in private by only the priest and the deacon. And that also includes some other stuff. But it has Liturgy of Preparation, Liturgy of Catechumens, and Liturgy of the Faithful, which in that part, the Eucharist.
And Liturgy of Preparation, is it like analogous to something like the vesting prayers and stuff in
Yes. TLM? Yes. So it does contain entrance and vesting prayers, but it also has a part where they prepare the bread that will be used for the Eucharist. They actually cut a piece of bread and they prepare it, and then they cover it with cloth and tie it and whatnot. I highly recommend, finding a clip on YouTube and watching them do it. It's quite beautiful.
Yeah, maybe we can put that in the show notes if you can help us find it.
Yeah, I can do
awesome.
that.
So in the Mass of Paul VI, there's a change in terminology to the 2 halves of the Mass, right? The Mass of the catechumens becomes the Liturgy of the Word, and the Mass of the faithful becomes the Liturgy of the Eucharist, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I find this very interesting, too, because of the fact that if you look at the original reason why there was the Mass of the catechumens and why there's the Mass of the faithful is because of the fact that it was literally the catechumens could attend that initial part, but as soon as the Mass of the faithful was to begin, they were taken out of the church and the doors were locked, and they were not allowed to enter because they were not able to receive and partake of the divine mysteries that were about to be celebrated. There there was in particular in the old Mass, in the tradition of the Church, this understanding of mystagogy, right? This understanding of the mystery of the faith that catechumens were unable to receive. There were even, like, if you look at the like the early writings of the Church Fathers, they talk about the secrets. Why is it the secrets? It's because they believed that those who were not fully initiated into the church were unable to properly process what was happening. They would not be able to get it without our Lord having given them the grace through baptism to start to understand these secrets and these mysteries. And so, like, even in, Mike made reference to what was it called? The prayer of access. Is that what it is called?
Humble access, yeah. And it says, do you want me to read that part?
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know which part you're talking about. It says, I will not reveal your secrets to the enemy or to your enemies.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So there is that reason why there was that separation, and I think rightfully so. I think the church had a firm understanding that these things were not to be trifled with. These were things of great power and great holiness, and they were not to be just handed out to somebody who was not worthy to receive it, or even shown to those who were unworthy to receive it. And I think perhaps in the mind of Paul VI and in Annibale Bugnini, again, we'll talk more about his intentions, but that sense of separation between the Catholics and those who are not, between those who are in a state of grace and those who are not. Yeah, they didn't want that. They want all are welcome, kumbaya and all of that. It wasn't actually, they didn't really have a firm understanding or a belief that these mysteries that we celebrate are something to be reverenced and to be protected.
Yeah, and that attitude it's scandalized by the way the early church looked at these things, right? And when our Lord talks about casting pearls before swine and stuff like that, it's like that kind of thinking is just anathema to the modern mindset of everyone has to be good enough exactly as they are. By the way, I'm looking for that quote because I don't think it's the prayer of humble access. It's from a different prayer in this liturgy, isn't it?
It's not in the Ordinariate. Yep. It's in the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom.
What part is it in? I've been looking for.
So he says, so the priest says, "O Son of God," or no, wait, is this what the people say? "Is customary for the priest and deacon to offer the following prayers of Holy Communion." So he goes through it, and then he says, "O Son of God, receive me today as a partaker of your mystical supper. For I will not speak of the mystery to your enemies, nor will I give you a kiss as did Judas. But like the thief, I confess to you, remember me, Lord, in your kingdom." So yeah, so
that's why we were thinking it was the prayer of humble access, because it's like the Byzantine equivalent of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, it took a while to get there, but yeah. So this is something that even in the 500s, like and 400s, the church had an understanding of that. This was not something to be handed out willy-nilly to whoever. This was not meant to be given to adulterers and those who are in a state of mortal sin. And while it may be medicine, it is certainly not medicine meant for all people, because those who are in a state of sin and a state of mortal sin are allergic to that medicine. they'll have the opposite effect of what you intend when you receive the Blessed Sacrament in a state of mortal sin. So anyway.
Yeah. St. John Chrysostom knew that he wasn't talking about a prize for the perfect, and yet everyone still knew that the Eucharist was for Catholics in a state of grace.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I think Eastern Rite Catholics and in the Orthodox as well, they seem to have a better understanding of the Blessed Sacrament than we do, insofar as, like, I've been to multiple divine liturgies and only a handful of people go up to receive Holy Communion, and it's totally normal.
Yeah.
Like, I remember even our first experience going and us being like, do we go up? Do you remember that? Like, being like,
I remember that.
We should
I remember that.
Or not. So,
well, even when we went to we live not too far from the Ukrainian Catholic Church, which uses the Divine Liturgy there. And, only a handful of people went up, but we were kind of like, should we go up? Like, we're not regular parishioners here, so we didn't want to cause any, I was
also,
worried that
they receive a lot differently than us. So
yes, they do.
You got to know what you're doing, kind of.
Yeah.
If you're at Divine Liturgy.
Yeah.
Although, really, all you have to do is open your mouth.
Yeah,
still.
you just stand there, open your mouth.
they may ask you your name too, but that's a side note. So with these three masses, so with the Tridentine Mass, there is a Mass of the catechumens, and it's clearly delineated. So then in the Mass of St. John Chrysostom, that also exists, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Liturgy of the Catechumens.
Okay. But just not
Liturgy of the Catechumens and Liturgy of the Faithful. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but nothing in the Novus Ordo. It's not like it's meant to be for the catechumens only. Actually, random side note about this. So one of the things that grinds my gears, especially in the Novus Ordo Church, is Sunday school for young kids, because it's almost the inverse of this. So they take the children away during what would be the Mass of the catechumens and bring them back for the Liturgy of the Eucharist, even though they can't receive.
Mm-hmm. Like the part that they should be staying at, they're like kicked out because, it's too disruptive. They're not going to learn anything anyway.
Yeah.
Again, I don't like Sunday school.
Again, a very
Mass.
Protestant understanding, right? Like you have to be able to learn and study instead of just receiving the grace, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that was very hard to understand with going to Latin Mass. It's like, the readings are just chanted in Latin. Am I not supposed to be sitting here learning like it's a lecture hall? Because that was the attitude in Novus Ordo. Like when the readings are there, you're there listening like you're in school. And it's totally different in the Latin Mass and in the Divine Liturgy, because the readings are part of the worship, right?
Yeah,
right. The another thing, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, right? So in Novus Ordo parishes, they refer to the main altar where the sacrifice is offered, and they refer to that as, the altar of sacrifice. And then they also have where the ambo is, right, which is the pulpit or whatever you want to call it. And they refer to that as the altar of the word. And then you have the altar of repose, which is a third altar where the Blessed Sacrament resides. Typically in the Tridentine, all of those altars are one thing, right? because Christ is not separated into three things. He's not, he is the priest, the victim, the altar of sacrifice. He is the Word made flesh, all of those things. And so the fact that the altar was essentially split into three parts, instead of it being just one altar, to me it's mind-blowing. And it's also, if you look at our Protestant, the Protestant churches, that's how they do it. It's and generally it's the ambo or the pulpit, they don't call it an ambo, has pride of place, and so they have to make sure it's they have to make sure it's a central point. Like I actually was looking at a parish in, where were we? Down in Champaign-Urbana, and they actually shifted everything to the left or to the right. So the altar of the Word was more central than the altar of sacrifice. It was weird.
Okay, so if you're looking at a high altar, you're talking about for example, with a high altar, the tabernacle was often in the altar, correct?
Yeah.
Right. And then there'd be, the main altar, the surface. I don't know all the parts yet. And then there would be the is lectionary the right word? What's the word that I'm looking for?
Yeah, like a lectionary.
The missal. Yeah. So is that what you're talking about? How normally all of those parts would be together? Yeah,
like the altar itself in the Tridentine, right, it's all one piece. So you've got, where the sacrifice is offered is the center of the altar, right?
Yeah.
And there's the epistle side of the altar, which is what would be our, if you're looking at it, it would be on our right-hand side, right?
Everybody's facing the same way because it's a TLN.
Right, exactly.
So
then you got the epistle side, and then you've got on the other side is what's referred to as the gospel side. But it's all on the same altar. Nothing is you don't pick up the book of the Gospels and go to another altar, for example, and read it.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, in the in a high mass where you have deacon and subdeacon, they will come down off of the altar or off from away from the altar and just have the book held for them, and they chant it, but they chant it towards the north, what would be liturgical north, which is the Gentiles. But that's has
a really cool little symbol.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. We'll actually probably get into that when we get into the symbolism of the epistle and the gospel side and whatnot. But but in the Novus Ordo, it's just picked up and brought out, and everything is said to the same direction to the people, right? It has no actual significance liturgically.
Yeah. Who else is there? Just us.
You can't spell Novus Ordo without us.
Sorry, I'm becoming a smart ass already.
I wanted to make a point that I wanted to say earlier, but things were on a roll. It's interesting to see, for lack of a better word, authorship. And by authorship of these liturgies, I just mean them literally being compiled and written down as a means of preserving the tradition so that it can, stay. You know what I mean? Whereas with the Novus Ordo Mass, it was trying to make something from something else and then completely change it. You know what I mean? It's like trying to, move something from one cup into another cup and then spilling everything and then go, good enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I don't get it at all.
Well,
Like you're trying to say it's the same. You're trying to take it and, just move it over and change it up a little bit. But, Chris gets it.
I don't get the analogy at all.
You're essentially trying to say, no, we're not going to change anything. But then you ultimately end up losing a bunch of stuff.
That's not what they said, though. They wanted to change everything.
yeah.
Did they say that?
We will
yes.
get into that.
Oh yes.
I'm asking, rhetorically.
Yeah.
Did they say that?
It made me think when you were saying how the early codifications were to preserve the traditions and set them in stone, and the revision, if you can call it that, of Paul VI was literally the opposite. It was designed to make the tradition go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see what you're saying.
And yet tradition was hanging out in the wings, just waiting.
Yeah.
Waiting for its
maybe
big debut.
don't include my analogy. But
it stays.
That was
it
the
stays.
best part of this episode.
It'll remain, Brooke.
No. But no, it's just weird to see how, compiling as a means to preserve versus not doing that and getting a committee of people coming together, many of them not Catholic, or some of them, whatever, and then rewriting something that didn't even need to be changed.
Right. Well, here's the thing too, right, is never really before. I mean, we've had councils and things like that in the past, but I mean, committees. When have we ever had committees in the history of the church? Until the 60s. You know what I mean? Like, you don't hear about, the Great Council of Lyons, where the Great Committee, got together, the committee fathers.
Not together until Annabelle from the parish council.
Exactly. So, I mean, but the weird thing is that we see that line of thinking, that democratic kind of form of thinking, which had never really been in the church, really started taking root, especially at that time, and really gained traction. And that's kind of where I think we find ourselves today. We find ourselves having synods, and things are being
a lot of them.
Yeah. And things are being decided by democratic vote.
Lots of synods. We decide everything this way. They're good. What are you laughing at, Chris? Is it my accent?
Does it give me away?
No, it's the heresy coming out of you.
Oh, gee. But that's the thing. We as a church have never had that, right? Like, it's not. This isn't me throwing shade at anybody, but it's me saying like when did this become a thing for us? It's never been. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where, at least for me, as this young kid who was, trying to grow in his own relationship with God and the church, started having to ask those tough questions. And I mean, it's a dangerous road to go down, because it actually, you do have to have a healthy dose of cynicism towards what's happening right now in the church today.
Now, here's a question, honest question from me. If I was to look at the original document for what they wanted the Novus Ordo to look like how different is it to the Novus Ordo that we have today?
Whose document?
when those papers landed on the Pope's desk and said, hey, this is what the Novus Ordo is going to look like?
I could be wrong, but I thought he pretty much gave Bunini everything he wanted. Is that not right?
Yeah, that's basically true. There is, because there were different missals leading up to kind of what we have today, which there are kind of slight variations. But yeah, I mean, we can legitimately see where the break was between the Tridentine and the new Mass, because it's completely different. Even in its first stages, it's still a totally different Mass than what it used to be. And I think I'm pretty sure I linked to it in our group, but maybe we'll include that in the show notes of the first missal that was created before the missal that we really understand and have today. I mean, we've already gone through, what was it, in 2011, another major revision of the Mass of Paul VI that brought things back, at least translation wise.
Yeah, I remember that.
To follow more what the Roman Missal has and says.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, it's still fundamentally different from the Tridentine Mass. Like if you're listening to this and you've never really experienced the Latin Mass before, and you've experienced the current Mass, you may be familiar when people say it's like the same thing only in Latin, or it's got the same essential parts. What we are going to be setting out to do as well with this is to show you that no, it doesn't have the same parts. That it is fundamentally different.
Yeah, it's not like they just took the Novus Ordo, the Latin Mass, dropped it into a Google Translate, and boom, there's a Novus Ordo.
Yep. Exactly.
No.
Yeah, if you translate the TLM into English, you get something a lot closer to the Ordinariate Use, although some stuff is still quite different.
Yeah.
But
and it would, what would be interesting as a challenge? Go to a Latin Mass and a Novus Ordo Mass in the same day.
I don't recommend that.
Watch it on TV. Watch the Novus Ordo on TV.
Brooke's opinions are not the official opinions of Theology of
Views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Theology of the Body Limited.
But seriously, it's so obvious that they're different.
Yeah.
In smells, sounds, everything.
But as Kwasniewski says, sorry about killing your name there, doctor, it's more than smells and bells.
Mm-hmm.
In the substance of what is said and done at the Mass is different.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even some will say, well, some of the parts are still there. They've just been reworded or, shortened or stripped or moved or become optional.
The thing is that you're totally right. And I mean, we'll get more into it as well. But another thing that Dr. Peter Kwasniewski makes, again, sorry, doctor, one of the things that he really harps on well, especially in his book, Noble Beauty, Transcendent Holiness, is the fact that especially in the Novus Ordo Church, we've kind of gotten into this mindset of reductionalism. So we say, well, whatever happens during the Mass, they've got bad music, and the prayers of the faithful might be wonky and the homily is terrible and whatnot. But you know what? As long as there is a valid consecration, it's still Mass and it's still good. And Dr. Peter goes into why that kind of level of reduction is bad. How we can't necessarily, and how the church hasn't looked at the Mass in such a reductionist way in the past, and how, and so maybe, again, coming back to what we want to accomplish with this series is we want to go through each of those constituent parts to open up why they're there and why they're important and why they should never have been removed.
Yeah.
Any other further thoughts?
It's, I don't know. It makes me just hope like it'll just, I don't want to say enlighten, but inform people, of those parts that were ripped away, that are important, not only to the laity, but to clergy, to aid in, preserving the tradition that the apostles have, handed down through the church. Like, I would hope that they wouldn't just be forgotten because of, I don't know. You don't want to lose tradition. You need it.
Yeah, it's like what Pope Benedict said, right? Do you remember the quote from Summorum Pontificum where he says, what previous ages considered great and holy remains so for us. Mm-hmm. And it can't be forgotten.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And that's part of why we find ourselves going to the Mass of the ages, is because of the fact that we find ourselves able to connect with that patrimony in a more real and tangible way than we do in the Novus Ordo. I mean, there's a million reasons why we attend the Latin Mass now, but I mean, that's one of the big things. So I can look at it and go, my great-grandmother prayed this Mass. This is what she prayed. And this is what, like, her dad prayed. And, like, this is what the great saints have prayed.
Thomas Aquinas prayed.
Yeah.
And what Therese prayed,
Anyway, I hope that you guys will go on this journey with us. It's going to be a little bit like Lord of the Rings, really drawn out.
It's like the extended edition, except it's like super extended edition.
So,
but in a good way, just like the actual Lord of the Rings extended editions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're learning
awesome.
We're learning too as we're going part by part. So.
Oh,
yeah.
Better analogy. What's more extended than the extended editions of Lord of the Rings?
What?
The books. It's also more trad too. This podcast will be like the books, Lord of the Rings. Not this modernist moving picture stuff.
Too good. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. This has been good.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, do you have any parting thoughts before we go?
Read the liturgies. Just read them. Or watch a little synopsis.
If you get the chance, go to Divine Liturgy too.
Yeah.
And also go to the Latin Mass.
They are super, super friendly at all of the parishes that we've been to that have the Divine Liturgy. Often we've been to the Ukrainian one. We've been to 2 Ukrainian ones. They're super, super nice. And this is a funny aside.
They sold us pierogies.
A funny aside to that, last night I was like, I'm going to look at this, little synopsis of Divine Liturgy on this Polish parish's website. And along the tabs, they had home, bulletin, visitors, resources, and in its own tab, pierogies. I am not kidding. It was at a parish in Texas, and I was like, that is where I'm going to be going in Texas.
See, unlike most Catholic parish websites, they know what people are going to their website.
They know what they're looking for.
Other sites, you got to be like, hey, I want the Mass time or the confession time. Those are the only two pieces of information that need to be on your site. What's all this blog stuff?
Yeah.
And they have it hidden somewhere.
Yeah.
These people know. They want Divine Liturgy and they want pierogies. That's it.
Yeah. And
Put that
it's
on
a
my
beautiful
tombstone.
liturgy.
Put that on my tombstone. He wanted the Divine Liturgy and pierogies.
It's a beautiful liturgy. And it will be in Ukrainian or, Polish or something. Or
Church Slavonic.
Or Church Slavonic, yeah. But it's beautiful. It's great. It's super cool.
So we didn't get to the vesting prayers, but we'll talk about that next week for sure. Yeah, so definitely tune in to hear us talk about the importance of the vesting of the priest as part of the liturgy. Mm-hmm. So, and what you should do as a Catholic, as uniting, how you can unite yourself with the prayers of the priest at that time. So we'll give some tips for that as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Stay tuned and stay tratty.